3. Views from the Wall and Banshees. It looks a bit like the inside of a cave that has been turned inside out and warmed by the sun. Stephanie Payne, A Year in the National Parks, The Greatest American Road Trip. I was in my mid-20s the first time I visited Badlands National Park. The scenery stunned me. The colored rock layers, ragged peaks, spires, painted buttes, fossil beds, and steep slopes took my breath away. I was in awe. I thought it was weird how the rolling, grassy, rolling plain suddenly turned to an austere and inhospitable terrain. There is no transition. It is grass as far as the eye can see, and suddenly these peculiar formations that are nearly impassable rise from the ground. No wonder they call this the Badlands. What a place to visit! This was nothing like the Blue Ridge Mountains back home in Virginia. Cold mountain streams tumbling over ancient boulders are not found here, and there is not a tree in sight. There are no hillsides covered in mountain laurel. The air here is dry, and that familiar smell of dirt and decaying leaves mixed with the East Coast humidity was in a far-off place. This is a foreboding, desolate, hard-scrabble land. I fell in love with it at once. I remember talking to a cowboy when I was in South Dakota for the first time. I was the typical tourist, signed up for a Badlands horseback ride, and he was my guide. He was tall and lanky, with dark hair and gray sideburns, and he looked to be about my age now, a little shy of 50. His face was as weather-beaten as his saddle, and he reminded me of the Marlboro Man, the iconic cigarette-smoking cowboy that was a staple on billboards around the country until the politicians and bureaucrats hopped out of the tobacco industry's bed. The old cowboy, I thought he was old back then, asked me where I was from. Virginia, I told him. "I just got back from Virginia about 3 weeks ago," he said. "Boss lady had me out there looking at some horses." A lot of rich people have big horse farms up and down the Shenandoah Valley and down around Charlottesville, too, I said. Riding horses is a hoity-toity activity back home. "Is that right?" "Yeah, especially in Northern Virginia, outside of D.C. Only folks with more money than God can afford enough land for horses." "Wow." "Supply and demand, I guess." "Well, plenty of land out here." "Indeed there is. So much land. Being from the East, it's hard to fathom how much land there is out here." "It's getting a little expensive in some places, but I'd say nothing like out your way, though." "So, how'd you like it back there in the Commonwealth?" "Meh, I don't know. It's pretty and all, but too many trees." "Not a fan of trees, huh?" "They're fine, but not when there's that damn many of them." "Well, yeah, we do have a tree or two, and when compared to here especially." "I felt closed in. Here I can see. You can't see nothing out there with all them trees." "Never really occurred to me before, but I see your point." "You probably think it's too open out here, I bet." "Nah, so far I love it, but it's different, I'll tell you that." Badlands, fascinating geological features. Wikipedia describes Badlands as a type of dry terrain where softer sedimentary rocks and clay-rich soils have been extensively eroded. Wikipedia goes on to say that Badlands are found on every continent except Antarctica. I can't help but wonder if maybe there are Badlands in Antarctica too, underneath the ice somewhere. Badlands are characterized by steep slopes, minimal vegetation, lack of a substantial regolith, and high drainage density. Ravines, gullies, buttes, hoodoos, and other such geologic formations are common in Badlands, according to Wikipedia. The Park Service attributes the formation in Badlands National Park, and Badlands around the world, as the product of deposition and erosion. In the geology portal on the Badlands National Park website, the processes are explained as follows. Deposition is the process of rocks gradually building up. Over the course of millions of years, the layered rocks of the Badlands were slowly stacked on top of each other like a layer cake. These rocks were deposited by a number of natural forces, which range from shallow inland seas to rivers to wind. Deposition began about 75 million years ago with the formation of the Pierre Shale, the base of the geologic formations in the park. Deposition ended about 28 million years ago with the Sharps Formation, the uppermost unit of the Badlands stratigraphy. Erosion is the process of rocks gradually wearing away. The Badlands began eroding about 500,000 years ago as the Cheyenne and White Rivers carved their way through the landscape. They are the reason for the narrow channels, canyons, and rugged peaks of the Badlands which we see today. And the Badlands are still eroding. It is estimated that the Badlands erode at the rate of 1 inch per year, which is a rapid rate for rocks. In contrast, the granite of the Black Hills to the west of Badlands National Park erodes at the rate of 1 inch per 10,000 years. At its current rate, the South Dakota Badlands will be gone, eroded down to nothing, within the next 500,000 years. There is another school of thought when it comes to Badlands formations: catastrophism. Badlands can form quickly, and, in fact, we have a recent example of a rapid Badlands formation. The eruption of Mount St. Helens in Washington created a set of Badlands. Shortly after the eruption in 1980, rapid erosion of the resulting debris avalanche from the blast sculpted a formation similar to what we see in the Dakotas. The rapid formation of Badlands can take place outside of natural processes too. Poor farming practices and bad land management can create Badlands by stripping away vegetation, which leads to rapid erosion. One such example is the Cheltenham Badlands in Ontario. According to Wikipedia, in the late 1800s and early 1900s, the Cheltenham Badlands property was used for agricultural purposes, predominantly cattle grazing. Farming practices ceased on the property in 1931, and natural recovery of the majority of the property lands began. Once established, this type of erosion continues rapidly, particularly if land clearing, overgrazing, and increased foot traffic by humans persists, since the shale itself is highly susceptible to erosion. I can't help but wonder if something happened in South Dakota, North Dakota, and Montana to rapidly form the Badlands. Maybe something like a cataclysmic flood, such as the one described in the Bible. Weirdness in the Badlands. There is a great spot, well known among the RV community, where you can boondock or camp free of charge without water and electric hookups, called The Wall, overlooking Badlands National Park. My wife and I parked the RV here for a few nights during our stay in South Dakota. The Wall is just south of the town of Wall, South Dakota, and lies within the Buffalo Gap National Grassland. RV sites here, really nothing more than just parking in the grass, offered amazing views of the Badlands, and bighorn sheep walk unafraid among the campsites. The wall is just that, a wall. It's a rock formation with a sheer drop leading into the Badlands. I love places like this. These are the campsites I used to daydream about while sitting in traffic during my hellacious commutes before I quit my job and sold my house. I used to lose myself in thoughts of the warm sun on my face and the feel of the wind off the plains as I worked on a meaningless project inside a dingy building. Back then, I wondered how it would feel to be in a place like this while following my own directions, holding to my schedule and tied to no one. Now I was living it. I sometimes wonder how long this lifestyle can last. But out here on the wall, I put those thoughts aside. Failing to live in the moment is to dishonor a magical place like this. As I spent slow and easy evenings watching the sun go down over the Badlands, I reflected on catastrophic floods, the very kind that may have formed these Badlands. From there, I moved on to thinking of mysteries that are more recent, such as strange lights in the sky. I had observed a weird bluish light the night before. I also saw the occasional out-of-place twinkle of a white light far out on the horizon, but it's hard to tell what they were. If you look far enough on the distance from atop the wall, you can barely make out Interstate 90, and I suppose strange lights might come from there and just appear anomalous from the high-up vantage point. But the bluish light I spotted, I don't have a good explanation for that. I don't have a good explanation for a ghost story from the Badlands that I had read many years ago either. In his 1896 book, Myths and Legends of Our Own Land, Charles M. Skinner recorded a number of strange tales from across the nation. One of those stories came to mind as I enjoyed the cool air while sitting outside my RV about an hour or so before I went to bed one night. The story is titled The Banshee of the Badlands, and it tells of a ghostly woman that haunts a butte. The Banshee is sometimes accompanied by a skeleton that enjoys music. I have reprinted the classic story in its entirety below. Hell with the fires out is what the Badlands of Dakota have been called. The fearless Western nomenclature fits the place. It is an ancient sea bottom with its clay strata worn by frost and flood into forms like pagodas, pyramids, and terraced cities. Labyrinthine canyons wind among these fantastic peaks, which are brilliant in color, but bleak, savage, and oppressive. Game courses over the castellated hills. Rattlesnakes bask at the edge of the crater above burning coal seams, and wild men have made despairing stand here against advancing civilization. It may have been the white victim of a red man's jealousy that haunts the region of the butte called Watchdog. Or it may have been an Indian woman who was killed there. But there is a banshee in the desert whose cries have chilled the blood that would not have cooled at the sight of a bear or panther. By moonlight, when the scenery is most suggestive and unearthly, and the noises of wolves and owls inspire uneasy feelings, the ghost is seen on a hill a mile south of the Watchdog, her hair blowing, her arms tossing in strange gestures. If war parties, immigrants, cowboys, hunters, any who for good or ill are going through this country, pass the haunted butte at night, The rocks are lighted with phosphor flashes, and the Banshee sweeps upon them. As if wishing to speak, or as if waiting a question that it has occurred to none to ask, she stands beside them in an attitude of appeal. But if asked what she wants, she flings her arms aloft, and with a shriek that echoes through the blasted gulches for a mile, she disappears, and in an instant later is seen wringing her hands on her hilltop. Cattle will not graze near the haunted butte, and the cowboys keep aloof from it, for the word has never been spoken that will solve the mystery of the region or quiet the unhappy Banshee. The creature has a companion, sometimes in an unfleshed skeleton that trudges about the ash and clay and haunts the camps in a search for music. If he hears it, he will sit outside the door and nod in time to it, while a violin left within his reach is eagerly seized and will be played on through half the night. The music is wondrous, now as soft as the stir of wind in the sage, anon as harsh as the cry of a wolf, or startling as the stir of a rattler. As the east begins to brighten, the music grows fainter, and when it is fairly light, it has ceased altogether. But he who listens to it must on no account follow the player if the skeleton moves away, for not only will it lead to him into rocky pitfalls, whence escape is hopeless, but when the music will intoxicate, madden, and will finally charm his soul from his body. I don't know what to think about old stories like the Banshee of the Badlands. Is there a kernel of truth to these old tales? Or are they the late 1800s version of creepypasta? After all, scary, made-up stories have been around long before the internet. I am happy to report that I didn't hear the eerie shrieks of a banshee. Phantom music did not try to lure me from the safety of my RV and lead me to my doom out in the forbidding, otherworldly landscape of the Badlands. I sat outside again the following night, thinking of strangeness in the tough and rocky terrain below. Early that evening, I had gotten a taste of how inhospitable this land can be. As I was cooking dinner on the grill, a windstorm suddenly hit us. Out of nowhere, the wind rolled in from the plains, blowing at what I estimated was over 40 miles an hour, sustained. The gusts probably hit 60 miles an hour. I turned off the grill, grabbed our half-cooked food, and rushed inside. Our food was covered in dirt and grit from the blowing sand. We fixed dinner inside and stayed in for a couple of hours as the RV rocked to and fro, almost making us seasick. As quickly as the wind blew in, it stopped. Relieved that the wind didn't get any worse and happy that it had stopped blowing, my wife and I went back outside where we sat until about 11 p.m. I didn't think of the banshee that haunts the Badlands. Tonight, my mind was on Bigfoot. As I enjoyed a cold local IPA, I wondered about Bigfoot in the Badlands. This didn't seem to me to be a good place to see a Bigfoot. Not here in this barren and rocky wasteland. But there are sightings. There have been so many sightings in the nearby Pine Ridge Indian Reservation that the crew from Animal Planet's Finding Bigfoot traveled to the reservation and filmed an episode. Of course, they didn't find anything. They never do. A more accurate name for the show would be Not Finding Bigfoot. I know, That's a tired and lazy joke that isn't funny, yet it's true. I think that if there are any Bigfoot creatures roaming around in the Badlands, they're probably en route to somewhere else, such as the farms and ranches on the prairie and the forests of the Black Hills. Sure, there is some water in the Badlands, and there are animals that a Bigfoot could feed on, such as bison, bighorn sheep, and prairie dogs, but it seems to me the Black Hills would be a more suitable place to live and offer better cover. But then again, who can say when it comes to Bigfoot?